Everyone, welcome to the Business Growth Pod. I'm Allan Draper, your host. Today, I'd like to welcome to the show Marty Strong. Check this out. Marty is a retired Navy SEAL officer and combat veteran. That's crazy. He's a consultant, speaker, the author of 9 novels, and a practicing CEO. He's also the author of the business leadership books, Be Nimble, How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business, and Be Visionary, Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization, which is set for release in December of 2022. So right around the corner. We're excited to hear about some of those things. Welcome to the show, Marty.
Hey, how you doing, Allan?
We're doing great. We're doing great. Oh man, I feel like there's so much to talk about. A lot of our audience is entrepreneurs, especially in those early stages. And I feel like what you've written about can help so much, help them in those early stages. Let's talk a little bit about, I'd like to hear about your Navy SEAL career, how you got into that, and what that has done and it's continuing to do for you with what you're accomplishing right now as an author, business owner, all those things.
So I joined the Navy at 17. Originally was lined up to be a radar operator and air traffic controller. I went to school for 17 weeks for that. Through a mistake of orders, I ended up at SEAL training in Coronado, California. And instead of fixing my orders, they talked me into staying and volunteering into the program. Got to remember, I was 17, so I didn't have a whole lot of brain cells operating at the time. So I said, sure, I'll do that. About 125 pounds soaking wet, started the 6-month program along with 124 other guys, and about 13 original guys out of that 125 graduated 6 months later. So I spent first 10 years as an enlisted SEAL, and then and got my undergraduate degree in business during that time. And then my second 10 years as an officer, I went to Officers Candidate School and became an officer in a SEAL team. So except for that 4-month break in Officers Candidate School, pretty much just 1 year I was a SEAL. And then I retired. And, as far as what that did, for the rest of my life, essentially you're selected for certain attributes. One of them is psychological resilience. And, since you're being selected when you're very young, most of the people are going through in their early 20s, you pretty much have got to already have that character trait embedded. It's not something they give you. They don't teach you. They don't train you to have psychological resilience. You have to have that to start with. And then what they do is they test you and they put you up against all kinds of stressful situations, which after they've confirmed you have this trait, then reinforces it, and you start to get more and more confident as the challenges and the kind of the stress exercises get more and more complex. And eventually what happens is you become very, very comfortable surrounded by crisis and chaos. And the people around you, which are groomed, trained, selected the same way, are of the same mindset. So you're basically moving forward with a bunch of people that are realists, but have really incredible creative IQs. They're willing to solve problems. They're not worried and stressed out while they're trying to problem solve. They count on each other. They trust each other. And you're constantly kind of mind melding ideas and cross-pollinating ways to fix things, do things, act, execute, et cetera. So you come out of something like that. I don't care if you've been doing that for 4 years, let alone 20 years. And it kind of changes the way you look at individual performance, leadership performance, and how teams can perform. And that pretty much segued on into my post-uniform phase.
That's awesome. And, there's no way, would be my guess, to replicate that. But how do I'm really envious that you got this training of learning to have this chaos all around you and you be able to just control what you can control your mindset, control your emotions, because I think that's such a valuable skill to entrepreneurs, because that's how it is sometimes, not at that level, but just a different type of chaos where you think your business is going to fail, people are upset with you, all these things. What is there anything that just a layperson, civilian can do to develop and hone in on that skill set of remaining calm and controlled in those difficult environments?
Well, it's a human trait. It's not a SEAL team trait necessarily. And if you're going to be a founder of a business and you've survived, 2 or 3 years, you've already got that psychological resilience. Whether you had it when you started or not, you have it now, because, running a business, scaling a business, having to hire, fire people, pick vendors, get burned by vendors and supply chain partners, all those things happen in almost any kind of business you can think of, especially in the early stages. Now, not everybody survives it. And some of the people that don't survive it because they decide they just don't want to live in that kind of high stress kind of crucible, right? Of constant change and emotional drama, et cetera, and financial drama too. And that's fine. You try it, it doesn't work out, then go do something else that kind of, works out for you. But anybody that's survived it, anybody that's got those first 2 or 3 years, they've already got that stamp. It's a part of them. And you get into a little bit bigger organizations, mid-sized organizations, and much larger organizations. It's an absolutely trainable thing. And the way you do it is through what we used to call scenario-based training. You essentially sit everybody around a table and you lay out a case study related to your business, and you start solving the problem, and you inject things that are dramatic changes to the assumptions or the information that you started with. And you give everybody a time limit. And it doesn't take a long time to do this. You can do this in 1 hour. You have 1 hour to fix, the nuclear reactor that's melting down. You have 1 hour to fix the traffic jam that's locked down, 2 tunnels going into Manhattan, or the power grid that just shut down, in Pennsylvania. You have 2 hours to do it, or 1 hour to do it. And of course, it's not real, but you have to set it up so that the details are real, and you don't feed them all the information up front. You feed them the way the story played out. Everybody said, okay, it's this is the problem. So everybody focuses on what everybody thinks the problem is. They spend 20 minutes of an hour, and then you inject another piece of information, which meant they wasted 20 minutes on the wrong set of assumptions. That's reality, right? And what happens is, if you practice this over and over again, this scenario-based training, they do it in the military all over the world. Contingency planning comes from this. You start thinking about, what are ways for us to prevent this from being like this that we can set up now? Are there checklists? Is there other kinds of training we can do? Are there fail safes? Are there single points of failure that we recognize that we need to shore up and maybe come up with some other redundancy? And it creates all kinds of other great thought processes and paths to inoculate yourself, protect yourself, defend yourself in advance. And plus, the whole team is psychologically, mentally adopting this mindset of problem solving under stress while the assumptions are changing. And then when the real thing hits, the team's trained. You get in the room, you take a deep breath and go, okay, we know what to do, guys, let's go. And we know the facts might change because we've been through this before.
I love this idea of kind of simulating different scenarios. And I think that could be very helpful in business. Now, with COVID, I don't think a lot of people were prepared for that. I think it caught maybe all of us by surprise, especially the degree. But one thing that it did for us was, we never know what's going to happen, especially with our business. We don't know what's coming around the corner. And so I think even with this scenario-based training, I think it's helpful because it can be analogous, even if it's not that exact scenario. If it's, something similar, there's some financial pressure in the markets, or, we have an issue with supply or whatever it is. And then you can and I think the biggest part of that is just being able to control the reaction. Like, hey, this is a big deal, but we're going to be able to get through this. Right. And building that confidence.
Right. Once it's agnostic as to the cause, because what you've done is you've created essentially a muscle, a business muscle, leadership muscle that allows you to master disruption instead of being a victim to it. And you don't just blow in the wind of the information and wonder what's going to happen next. You don't hunker down in a corner in the fetal position and just hope it goes all goes away. There's lots of books on black swan events, those things that you don't see coming. And after the fact, everybody always Monday morning quarterbacks and goes back and connects the dots.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor, 9/11, the pandemic. Oh yeah, sure. We all knew it. We all should have known it was coming, but we didn't. And nobody actually saw it coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when those events happen, they get studied. But those are big events that everybody's aware of. Corporations go through black swan events all the time. They just don't get publicized. And there's books written about these. It's worth business leaders finding books and articles on black swan events, the studies, and also how do you deal with it when it happens to you, because it doesn't have to be on the scale of a national attack from another source like Japan or Al Qaeda or somebody. Now, what the studies kind of chunk the reactions into are these 3 different reactions. This is lots and lots of case studies over many years, lots of different industries, including governments. The first one is the one I just mentioned. It's the denial reaction. You basically hunker down, you crawl in a corner, you deny the information, the facts, and you just keep doing exactly what you were doing. You project yesterday forward, and it's just going to go away. All we have to do is just wait, because it'll all go away. It'll get back to normal. The second one is the same as the first one, but it doesn't last very long. It may last a couple of days. The first one, those people will stay that way for sometimes 6 months, a year. And Kodak's a famous example that's always comes up, that they invented digital technology. Fuji took it from them and beat them at it. They said, well, that's not taking pictures. That's something to do with copiers. And even when they knew it was changing the world, they said no. They just went no. They didn't want to hear it. And then it was too late to change, because by that time everybody was eating their lunch, and that's the way pictures were going to be taken in the future, not with film. So that second chunk is maybe for 2 or 3 days you're in that mode. And that's kind of natural. I mean, you can have an emotional reaction, and you can have a mixed emotional reaction depending on how many leaders you have or how many people you have in a team that are critical to solving the crisis. And then the third one is you basically take a deep breath, like we mentioned before, because you've prepped for it. And the leaders pull everybody into a room and you go, look, guys, the world's changed. Here's the new reality. Let's face the new reality. Let's redesign, reinvent what we have to be in this new normal. And maybe there's some things we can take advantage of. Maybe there's some opportunities here if we look deep enough. But if we can't get our supplies from the same sources, if we aren't going to be able to deliver things to our customers the same way, if we're not going to be able to do this, do that, let's rethink, retool, and then go back out and hit the street again. Now, the way it breaks out is that second chunk tends to do that after a little bit of a break. It's kind of a hybrid between denial and taking action. And historically, the first group tends to shrink over time in market share and size, and they eventually get eaten up by that third group that become the new market leaders in the new normal. And the middle group kind of stabilizes, and sometimes they make it and sometimes they don't. So those are the 3 reactions of management teams and leadership teams in all kinds of organizations, including government, over a span of over 60, 70 years, as they all responded to different kinds of black swan crises. And the outcomes are pretty clear. The first method, you're going away eventually. The third method, you're going to come out a winner, because you face the reality.
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea of entrepreneurs having this mindset of, I use the word pivot a lot, where they're not necessarily giving up some of their core competencies, but they're realizing what's going on around them, and they're making changes to adjust with market conditions and other things that are happening. And it reminds me a little bit of a saying that's attributed to Jeff Bezos. I don't know the truth of that, but the idea is that if you have more than 30 or 40% of the necessary information to make a decision, that you're too late, because other people are going to be taking risks and they're going to be acting on that information before they have everything figured out. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs can understand that, but sometimes we just get caught in our ruts. We like feeling comfortable, especially after the startup phase. And so what are some things that maybe you've recommended through your books? I wanted to get into your books a little bit. Curious about Be Visionary and Be Nimble. But what are some things that business owners can do to stay sharp with this mentality and this idea of, hey, when something happens, we're not just going to hunker down. We're going to be looking for opportunities. Because Marty, I firmly believe that in every environment, especially in difficult environments like we're experiencing now and we're going to be for the next year or so, I think there's more opportunity than there is in good times. I think there's a lot of great opportunity. What do we need to tell the listener to help them develop that mentality of, hey, we're going to go out there and figure things out versus hunkering down and just trying to protect what we already have?
Be Nimble is pretty much about everything we've just been talking about. There's even a chapter on black swans and how to deal with it. So that's one good source. And the other thing I would say I call it the tactical operational kind of leadership challenges, the day-to-day, maybe a week ahead planning. You have to be able to get outside of the problem set a little bit. You have to be able to step outside of it, even at the tactical level, just even if it's for 3 or 4 minutes to think through what you just heard, what the decision is, and you have to game it out a little bit. You got to give yourself time to game it out. Because if you don't, what you do is you get into this kind of rote memorization of a formula or a football play, which is based on something you decided and made sense of 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, 2 years ago. In big corporations, these traditions, you ask somebody flat out, when they tell you how they do something, you go, why? And if you don't get an answer back that sounds like a detailed understanding of a process or a calculation or analysis, it's tradition. They don't know why. They might be able, the person that knows why may not even work there anymore, or maybe they retired 5 years ago. So we like to do as humans, there's kind of 80% of humanity loves stability and seeks stability, which is also comfort, control, right? They want tomorrow to be nice, just like today was nice. They want tomorrow not to be scary. That's 80% of the people. And then there's about 20% of the people that are constantly challenging the status quo. They're constantly looking at what can they do to improve things? What can they do to prepare for what's going to change? Because everything's going to change. The universe is in a constant state of change. There's nothing that's static, nothing. So if that's the case, then the human nature for anybody, including business owners, I don't care if you're the CEO of Microsoft or you're a business owner of a restaurant, you want stability because part of your DNA is screaming for stability, safety, and comfort. And that's across everything, financially, physically, emotionally, mentally. You just want a break, right? You just want it to calm down a little bit. But then if you try to use that as your main goal, if you rely on what you know is going to give you comfort and not recalculating what's the right decision in this particular situation, what you do is you start changing your strategy from growing a business to chasing comfort and security and safety, which means you're looking for a static position, which right off the bat isn't going to work because everybody around you is changing. The guys across the street, they're running a restaurant, across town running a restaurant. If they're not changing, if they're changing and you're not changing, if they're changing menus and pricing and they're changing advertising and they're doing other things, and you're trying to lock things down for comfort and stability, you may not even realize what's going on, but guess what? They're going to pass you by, they're going to beat you, and you're going to be done. So that's one of the dilemmas is leaders of all size organizations, and mostly because they're getting feedback from their people, from their structure, everybody wants them, can we just calm down? Can we just stabilize for 6 months or a month? Because that's what they want. It's a human thing. But if you're a leader or an owner, you got to realize that stability is harmful. Stability is actually destructive because you have to keep moving like a shark moving through the ocean. If you're not moving and eating, you're going to sink to the bottom and you're over. And as a business, until the day you sell the business, right? You have to be focused on growing the business, improving the business, growing the business, improving the business, and you compete to defend and you compete to offensively take more market share. And that's a constant thinking activity. It's a constant thinking exercise. It's not relying on, I've got 50% of this figured out in a standard operating procedure or a policy, and I can just forget about that and just work on these two. No, across the board every day, every decision, put the thought into it.
How do business owners either want to attract people that are on board with this quote unquote instability, or train their people or help them understand or be okay with it? Because I know that a lot of employees want to know, hey, we're status quo, everything's fine, because that's their personality. What is an entrepreneur to do in that situation?
Well, I can tell you from my time in the SEALs, you learn a lot by studying military history. You learn, it doesn't matter if it's a battle or it's just another guerrilla war that happened someplace, because everybody's pretty much done everything at least 10 times, and everybody's made the same mistakes. And if they've been documented by reading those mistakes, you've kind of absorbed that mistake and that lesson learned. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot less of that material out there for businesses, as there, everybody likes to write about wars and battles, and so there's lots of material. But I had that habit. So I probably consume about 50 to 60 books a year, one way or the other. I read lots of biographies of business leaders. I read lots of books about the rise and fall of companies. And when I do that, I'm looking for root causes and similarities and in the decision processes, the way they react, kind of like the black swan thing, but maybe not necessarily a big event crisis, but a long kind of decay. Opportunities missed, windows of opportunity that opened up, and then they said, no, it's too much of a risk. No, we want to stay stable, and they don't jump through it. Somebody else does. And then they're out of business 10 years later. And the more I read about it, the more I realized all the things I told you. That's how I kind of came to those conclusions. If the universe doesn't believe in static conditions, I think as Madame Curie has a great quote, that the only thing that's static in the universe is inanimate matter. I mean, in other words, there's nothing that's static. Everything, every cell in your body, every atom is in a constant state of some kind of flux or change, whatever. So it's actually a fallacy to think that should be an achievable goal. So how do you convince the people around you, even the stakeholders and people that might want to invest in you? You have to share these examples. Go out and read, find some case studies and show, look, this is a normal thing. If businesses don't evolve and if businesses don't grow and they don't morph into whatever they have to be, then they're going to die. I've used the metaphor of, if you were going to start off in a little tiny creek and you were going to start paddling towards, the east, as you started going and the creek opened up into a stream, and the stream opened up into a small river, then a big river, and then all of a sudden you're in a big delta, and then you're in the ocean. You're in the wrong vessel. You can't handle traveling across the ocean in this little tiny canoe that was fine for the start of your journey. You have to start changing the structure of the platform that you're in. If you think of that metaphor, you want to play with the big boys, you want to get bigger, stronger, whatever. You can't do it in the platform you started with. So you have to constantly be tweaking and thinking about what I want to be. And this is what Be Visionary is more about. What do I want to be? What do I want to look like? What's my competition doing? Are they doing something I want to emulate? Or are they doing something that I think is going to be destructive? And that's something I want to make sure I want to stay away from. And am I on the right? Is my structure of my company correct? Do I have the right number of employees? Should I have employees at all? Should I gig out everything? So these are all things that if you start thinking that way, and you bring everybody in the organization together and have them think that way, then you have everybody's brain cells all working towards what's a way to make this a better, faster race car, better, faster boat, and then everybody's on the same sheet of music.
So tell me a little bit about, you just mentioned kind of one thought from Be Visionary. Tell me a little bit about, and that releases pretty soon here, doesn't it?
Yeah, about 20 days.
Okay. So in the month of December, toward the end of December, tell me a little bit about why you wrote Be Visionary and what you were what you were wanting to create or the effect that you were wanting to get out of your readers from reading that.
Sure. So when I write books, novels or otherwise, and this isn't something I made up, a lot of writers use what are called beta readers, like beta testing. So in beta testing, you take some prototype, you hand it to a bunch of people, and they use it, and they come back and they give you feedback, right? So a beta reader does the same thing. You feed them your chapters one at a time, and they give you feedback on what they thought about it. If it's a novel, it's a little bit different than if it's a nonfiction book. And in the nonfiction books, both Be Nimble and Be Visionary, I had 6 or 7 CEOs, various size companies, probably a couple hundred years worth of leadership experience, lots of crises and problems and scar tissue. And I said, this is what I want to write about. This is how I want to make it sound like a mentoring communications kind of dialogue. And you hold my feet to the fire, chapter by chapter. So as this was going on, I guess it was probably somewhere in the 4th or 5th or 6th chapter of Be Nimble, there's a big focus area on strategic thinking. So I started getting feedback from all these guys that were reading and saying, hey, this is actually really valuable. You should think about writing a completely separate book, because they don't teach strategy and visionary thinking, just like they don't teach leadership in college, in business school, in grad school. And they rarely actually teach it in most companies. Mm-hmm. You start finding out about strategy as a real function when you've already arrived up there, but you've never been groomed and taught and trained and flexed your muscles. You never sat there and wrote one and watched one fail or watched one succeed. And I thought, okay. So I started fleshing out the outline of what I wanted to write about. And I realized that because money drives business, the people that have the money are focused on monetary financial outcomes and returns on investment. For the most part, what they want is they want to see how you've been doing. It's all about the past. So you end up with this hyper software, enabled, technology enabled micromanagement, micromeasurement of the past. And so you have a really, really, especially nowadays with all the technology we have, you have this crystal clear idea of what happened in the rearview mirror. And the more we've gotten used to doing that and relying on that, creating dashboards and KPIs, and we started coming up with this idea, and this is more of an accounting idea than a finance idea. Well, whatever happened in the past, we just flop it forward a couple of quarters or a year, maybe add 2% to it in growth. And that's our strategy. That's the path. That's where we're going. And what's happened is that's leached out over the last 20, 25 years. Any idea of sitting in a room and thinking big thoughts and thinking about the future in a visionary way. What do I want to be? Point. Yeah. Well, I'm making a point that's collectively out there in a lot of articles and a lot of writing, mostly about the short-term gratification, the shrinkage of the timeline of gratification that's gone on in publicly traded companies in the last 20, 25 years. And what happens with that, and happens in regular companies that aren't publicly traded, why would you invest in your employees or invest in new plant and equipment if you're not thinking about the future? What you do is you basically invest in maintenance of what you have. It starts to feel like you're really taking a heck of a leap of faith, and you're going contrary to all your optimization metrics. If you say, let's just throw some money at setting up, in Terre Haute, Indiana, let's do that, and everybody's going to stare at you and go, what are you, nuts? What if we lose it all? We're doing fine, just incrementally kind of controlling events. Now we're back to stability and control again. Same theme, right? So people that invest and lend money like stability. They don't like crazy reactions, with their investments. But that also kind of guarantees that you're not going to get much of a return for your money, because the big returns come from the dreamers. They come from the Steve Jobs of the world and the Einsteins and the Teslas. They don't come from a guy that graduated from accounting school. That's the old thing about if they actually taught imagination in high school, then why isn't every English composition teacher across the United States, Pulitzer Prize winning novelist?
Yeah, true.
Because they aren't. They're engineers. They're the experts in the science of putting words together, but they don't have the imagination component of it. So you have a lot of the same kind of the dichotomy between the money people and what management should be doing and leadership should be doing, and have been doing less and less and less over the last couple of decades, which is think a vision, dream that vision, convert it into a working strategy, and then plan back from that an operational campaign. And maybe a pivot. It may be a leap. It may be a complete change of suit. You might completely become a different kind of company. But if you're not doing it, I guarantee you one thing: if you're looking at that railroad track, counting one penny at a time, you're never going to see that train coming until it hits you.
That's such an interesting perspective, and I have to admit that I'm guilty of this a little bit. Just yesterday, we were working on. Working on setting goals and talking about budgets. And I'm a little sheepish in admitting this, but the way that we were doing it is we were looking at what we did last year and then doing the little bump up for what we expected growth to be. And you would say, hey, let's scrap that. Let's create this vision of where you guys want to be at the end of 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And then work our way backwards from where we are now and how we're going to get there.
It might align with where you are. It may be a bigger bump because you're not being aggressive enough. You're not being aspirational enough. But the key to this thing is thinking. It's sitting down and thinking. It's not counting. It's thinking. It's bringing everybody in a room. And again, you have to get everybody comfortable with this, because dreamers usually get heckled. This starts at the very young age. Actually, the third book I'm working on is called Be Different. It's all about divergent thinking and all that, the dynamics. But when you're young and you come up with an idea of what you want to be when you grow up or whatever, you got 80% of the people around you. It could be parents, it could be institutional people like teachers. 80% of them are telling you that's stupid. That's never going to happen. There may be 20% saying go for it. By the time you get into college, you're learning all the rules. You're learning all the structure of whatever discipline you're going into. Again, colleges teach history. So you learn about the traditions, the rules, the policies, the philosophies, et cetera. Then you go into a company and you get onboarded. What's the first thing they teach you? The rules of the company, the restrictions, the policies, the procedures. You go a decade forward. Now you're a senior manager. Now, where in there did you learn how to be, Steve Jobs? Nobody tried to teach you to be Steve Jobs. Everybody's got this capability to dream in their brain. The brains all work the same. It's just that society and institutions pound it out of you because they want stability out of their employees and their students, and they want stability out of an organization. And that stability is killing initiative and innovation.
I love it. I love that. Marty, this has been fantastic. Where can people reach out to you, learn more about your books, learn more about all the great things that you're accomplishing? Sure.
So you can go to martystrongbenimble.com. I have access there straight to Amazon for all my books, including my novels, my articles, podcasts, etc. martystrongbenimble.com.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Marty. Best of luck in the future.
And thanks for having me, Allan.
Please leave us a rating. And for daily inspiration and business tips, follow Allan on Instagram. Until next time, remember, we build the future one entrepreneur at a time.